Welcome to Silent Queen's Calling. I'm so glad you're here. Now let's get into the story. Selena held the pendant toward the glow of the centerpiece candles and tilted it so the green stone caught the gold light before she spoke. Reed had this made for me, she told the woman beside her, her voice carrying just far enough across the table. He said it was inspired by something vintage, very sentimental. Claudia Warren Haynes set her champagne flute down without a sound. She recognized the pendant before she registered the words. The oval tourmaline, deep green, with a faint white inclusion that curved like a brushstroke near the center. The hand-carved gold bezel, with the small leaf detail on the left side. The specific way it hung, slightly weighted to the right, because the bail had been resoldered by a jeweler in Charleston when Claudia was 19 years old. The pendant had disappeared from her studio 11 months ago, 3 weeks after she filed for divorce. It was Aunt Millicent who asked the question. Millicent Warren, 67, sat 2 seats down from Claudia with a glass of sparkling water, and the expression she reserved for auction houses when the provenance paperwork was incomplete. She had worked in antique jewelry for 35 years. She could identify a period setting by the thickness of a bezel at 40 feet. She leaned forward, looked at Selena directly, and said, "Where did you get that pendant?" The table quieted. 6 people, all connected to the Aldwych Heritage Restoration Foundation, all sensing that the question carried a weight the room had not yet measured. Selena smiled. It was a gift. From whom? From Reed. Millicent folded her hands on the tablecloth. Reed did not own that pendant. I gave it to my niece on her wedding day. The engraving on the back reads, "For the woman who builds." I chose that phrase myself. Reed Haynes, seated at the head of the adjacent table with the ease of a man who had arranged every detail of the evening, set down his fork. "Millicent," he said, keeping his voice low and smooth, "this isn't the place." "You brought it here," Millicent replied. "So this is exactly the place." Claudia did not look at Reed. She watched Selena's hand close around the pendant and felt a calm that surprised her. She had spent 11 months preparing for a moment she hadn't known would look like this. She had imagined a courtroom, or a deposition room, or a forensic report spread across a conference table. She had not imagined a charity gala in a restored ballroom with a ceiling medallion she had personally supervised 4 years earlier. She had not imagined her aunt doing it for her, but she had imagined staying quiet, and she did. The Heritage Restoration Gala was held every October in the Caldwell Pavilion, a 1920s ballroom that the foundation had spent 6 years returning to its original condition. Claudia had co-chaired the event since its 2nd year. She knew the width of the crown molding, the paint formula for the ivory walls, the name of the plasterer who had repaired the southeast corner medallion. She also knew that her name had been quietly removed from the printed program. The program described the gala's co-founders as a partnership of local preservation advocates. In each of the previous 5 years, her name had appeared beside Reed's on the inside cover. This year, a new organization was listed as co-presenter. Haynes Creative Collective, described as a boutique design consultancy specializing in heritage restoration. Claudia had built a design studio over 14 years of marriage. She had named it Warren Studio after her family name, and it had grown from a 2-person operation in a converted garage to a 12-person firm, with a reputation for historic interior restoration. Reed was a real estate developer. His contribution to the gala had always been financial. Hers had been the actual work. She had not understood the full shape of what was happening until her attorney, Tamsin Greer, placed a folder on the table between them 7 months ago and said quietly, "I need you to look at these business registrations carefully." Haynes Creative Collective had been registered as an LLC 14 months before Claudia filed for divorce. Selena, Reed's assistant, whom Claudia had believed to be a junior project coordinator, was listed as creative director. The company's registered address was a suite 2 floors below Reed's development office. "She's been pitching your clients," Tamsin said. Claudia stared at the page. 3 restoration contracts that went to Haynes Creative were bids Warren Studio lost in the past 2 years. The bid documents use the same design language as your proposals. Some of the specification sheets are identical, down to the supplier codes. Claudia recognized her own phrasing. She had written those specs. She had developed that language across a decade of projects, refining it with every contract, every site walk, every difficult client, who couldn't visualize what a restored building could become until she showed them. He gave her my files, Claudia said. That's what the data suggests. We need to prove it. The pendant had belonged to her grandmother, Nola Warren. Nola had worn it at her own wedding in 1951, and at every significant occasion after that. The tourmaline had come from a small jeweler in Asheville, chosen because Nola said the green reminded her of the mountain light she'd grown up under. When Nola died, she left the pendant to Millicent, her eldest daughter. Millicent wore it for 20 years, and then placed it around Claudia's neck on the morning of Claudia's wedding to Reed, in the side corridor of the church, because there hadn't been time to do it inside. Your grandmother wore this when she built her life, Millicent said that morning. I want you to wear it when you build yours. The engraving, for the woman who builds, had been Millicent's addition, made at a jeweler in Richmond 6 weeks before the wedding. Claudia didn't know about it until she turned the pendant over that evening and held it beneath the lamp in their hotel room while Reed slept. She had worn it at every project opening since. She wore it when the foundation celebrated the first completed restoration room at the Caldwell Pavilion. She wore it when Warren Studio won its first major heritage contract. She wore it on the day she told Reed she was filing for divorce, sitting across from him at the kitchen table, with the papers in a manila envelope she had carried in her bag all morning and almost didn't take out. 3 weeks after that conversation, she came home from a client site visit, and the pendant was gone from the studio drawer, where she kept it. The drawer had a small combination lock. She had changed the combination after moving into the apartment. She reported it to her insurance company and listed the provenance, the engraving, and the inclusion, the brushstroke of white mineral that Millicent called Nola's signature. The insurance adjuster told her a claim would require evidence of forced entry or theft by a known party. There was no forced entry. The building's entry log showed Reed's name on a visitor record from 3 days before she noticed the pendant missing. He had told the front desk he was collecting personal mail she'd been forwarding. Claudia did not call him. Tamsin had been clear about that. Written communication only, Tamsin said. When you confront someone directly, they manage their reaction. In writing, they reveal it. Claudia sent Reed a formal email through Tamsin's office, noting that the pendant was missing, that his visitor access had occurred during the same window, and asking him to confirm whether he had removed any items from the studio. He replied through his own attorney. The pendant was a marital asset. Its removal was legal pending classification, and any claim of theft was frivolous. The phrase marital asset told Claudia exactly where the pendant had gone and what Reed intended to do with it. Carmen Uribe spent 3 months on the financial records. She was a forensic accountant who had worked financial crimes cases for the SEC before opening a private practice, and she spoke in declarative sentences that left no room for wishful thinking, which was exactly what Claudia needed. Haynes Creative billed 3 clients for design work that originated in Warren's studio files. Carmen said at their first joint meeting, "The document metadata traces back to workstations assigned to your employees. The files were transferred to a cloud account linked to Selena's work email. Haynes Creative used them to produce bid packages." "That's intellectual property theft," Tamsin said. "It's also a breach of his fiduciary duty," Carmen added. Reed had signing authority on 2 foundation contracts where Warren Studio was the listed vendor. He used that authority to redirect scope to a competing company he had a financial interest in. That interest was never disclosed. He used the foundation's reputation to establish Haynes Creative's credibility, Claudia said. "The foundation reputation I helped build." "Yes. And the East Wing project that he announced tonight, the proposal originated with Warren Studio. I can show you the timestamps." Claudia already knew. She had written the concept document herself on a Tuesday evening in February, sitting at the drafting table in the studio with a cold cup of coffee and a reference photograph of the pavilion's original windows taped to the wall above her screen. At the gala table, Reed tried to move the evening forward. He stood and announced that Haynes Creative Collective would be presenting the foundation's new initiative for the East Wing restoration, describing it in terms Claudia recognized word for word from her own concept document. Millicent set her water glass down with a quiet click. "That project originated with Warren Studio," Claudia said. Her voice was level, precise rather than angry. "The proposal documents are filed with the foundation board. They carry my studio's header and my signature. Reed looked at her, with the expression he had used in every difficult meeting they had ever attended together. Patient, slightly sorrowful, the look that said she was making something larger than it needed to be. "We agreed to collaborate on the East Wing," he said. "We agreed to nothing after the filing date. Any agreement you're referencing would need to be in writing, which means it doesn't exist." The Foundation's board chair, Gerald Purcell, shifted in his seat. "Is there a documentation dispute here?" "There is," said Tamsin Greer from the chair beside Claudia, where she had been quiet for 20 minutes. "The East Wing proposal was submitted by Warren Studio in March and is time-stamped in the Foundation's records. We're prepared to provide that documentation at the board's request." Reed's expression shifted. "Not much, just enough." Selina had stopped turning the pendant. The Foundation board convened a special session 10 days later. Claudia presented the documentation without drama. Carmen walked the board through the bid packages, the metadata trails, and the overlapping supplier relationships. Tamsin submitted the divorce inventory, the injunction, and the correspondence in which Reed's attorney had described the pendant as a marital asset, thereby establishing that Reed knew exactly where it was and had made a legal claim on it before handing it to someone else. The pendant's presence on Selina's neck at a public event during an active proceeding with a property injunction in place was an unauthorized transfer of a disputed asset. That had a legal name, and Tamsin used it. The board's counsel reviewed everything and referred the matter to two bodies: the city's commercial arbitration panel for the intellectual property claims and the district attorney's office for the pendant. Reed's attorney filed a motion arguing that Claudia had orchestrated a public ambush. The board noted that Reed had chosen the venue, the occasion, the seating arrangement, and the announcement. The motion was denied. Selina cooperated with the investigation. She provided text messages in which Reed told her the pendant was family jewelry that came to me after the divorce was finalized. She said she had asked him twice whether it was clear to wear publicly, and he had told her the settlement had resolved the question. She provided the original packaging, a padded envelope with no return address, delivered by courier to her apartment. She had accepted the answer. She had not asked what was underneath it. The investigation would account for that separately from what Reed had done. The two were related but not identical, and Claudia understood the difference even when it would have been easier not to. The arbitration panel ruled in Claudia's favor on the intellectual property claims. Reed was ordered to cease use of Warren Studios' design documents, return all digital copies, and pay damages calculated from the revenue Haynes Creative had earned on contracts won using her proprietary specifications. Carmen also identified a joint account still listed in Reed's name from the marriage, undeclared in the divorce financial disclosure, that had received Haynes Creative revenue payments while the asset division was still in process. Tamsin added that to the list. The criminal matter concerning the pendant resulted in a charge of unlawful disposal of a contested marital asset, in violation of a standing court injunction. Reed's attorney negotiated a plea arrangement. Reed agreed to return the pendant, pay restitution, and provide a written disclosure to the Foundation, acknowledging that Haynes Creative had been funded in part through undisclosed joint marital resources. Selina was not criminally charged. She faced civil liability as Haynes Creative's named creative director and settled separately. She agreed to a period of non-compete in the heritage restoration sector. Claudia was not present at either proceeding. She spent those mornings in the studio, working on a renovation proposal for a mid-century public library. The city had been trying to restore for 11 years. The project had nothing to do with Reed. It was simply a building that deserved careful attention, and Claudia was the person who knew how to give it that. Millicent came to the studio when the pendant was returned. She sat at the drafting table and turned it over to read the engraving in the light from the window. "It's not scratched," she said. "The courier packed it well." Millicent set it down between them. "Do you want it back on now, or do you need a minute?" Claudia looked at it. The tourmaline was the same green it had always been. The brushstroke of white was still there, curving slightly toward the left, exactly where it had been in every photograph since 1951. "I kept quiet for a long time," Claudia said, "about the files that went somewhere they shouldn't have. About Selina's access to design records she had no reason to see. About proposals that came back from clients looking different from how we'd sent them. Every time I didn't follow through, I told myself I was protecting the marriage, which meant protecting the business, which meant protecting the staff. Millicent waited. He knew I would do that, Claudia said. He counted on it. Not because he was reading my mind, just because silence is easy to use when someone has given you enough reasons to stay quiet. You're describing something a lot of people do when they've built something with someone they trusted, Millicent said. I know. But the trust didn't stop the harm. It only delayed the record. Claudia picked up the pendant. I kept thinking that if I asked the right question in the right way, he'd correct course. He didn't need a question. He needed someone to be watching the paper trail. And now someone is. Now I am. Claudia fastened the pendant at the back of her neck. The tourmaline settled against her collarbone, with a familiar slight weight, and she held still for a moment just to feel it. I'm not wearing it the same way I used to, she said. Not because I'm going somewhere, or proving something, or because it fits the occasion. I'm wearing it because it's mine, and I know exactly where it came from, and what it costs to keep it. Millicent stood and looked around the studio. The drafting tables, the material samples, the photographs of completed projects mounted in frames along the far wall. Your grandmother would have liked this room, she said. She would have reorganized it. Millicent laughed, without asking first. The library contract was awarded to Warren Studios 6 weeks later. It was the largest single commission the firm had received in 3 years. Claudia brought on 2 junior architects and hired a provenance researcher to document the building's original material specifications before any design work began. The east wing of the Caldwell Pavilion was eventually reassigned to Warren Studio as well, after the foundation's independent assessment confirmed that the original proposal had been developed by Claudia's firm and that the methodology was sound. Gerald Purcell called to deliver the news himself. We should have caught it sooner, he said. The controls weren't built to catch what was happening, Claudia said. They are now. The foundation had revised its vendor selection process to require disclosure of any financial relationship between bidders and foundation officers. It was a specific rule designed to close a specific gap. It would not have been written without what had happened, and Claudia served on the committee that drafted it. At the next year's gala, the printed program listed her name correctly. Not beside Reed's, not bracketed under a vague institutional description, but as principal of Warren Studio, a founding partner of the Aldwych Heritage Restoration Foundation. Millicent sat beside her at the table. When the room raised a toast to the year's completed work, Claudia lifted her glass and felt the pendant shift slightly. Nobody at the table asked about it that evening, and she did not offer the story. The story was documented and dated and filed where it needed to be, which was exactly the right place for it. She had learned in the 11 months between the theft and the return that accountability did not require an audience. It required a record. One that named the act, named the date, named the parties, and could be examined by anyone who needed to understand what had actually happened. Reed had believed that if he moved quickly enough and spoke confidently enough, the record would never catch up to the story he was telling. He had been wrong about how fast the record travels when someone is building it carefully. He had also been wrong about Claudia. She had not broken at the gala table when Selena held the pendant toward the light. She hadn't screamed, hadn't reached across the white tablecloth, hadn't made a scene that Reed could later describe as unstable or vindictive. She had watched her aunt ask one clear, unhurried question and waited for the answer to do what accurate answers always do when they meet an incomplete story: reveal exactly how much is missing. That gap, once visible, could not be closed by charm or confidence or a well-placed silence. Claudia had once believed that staying quiet protected what she had built. She understood now that her silence had only protected the person who needed the record to stay unwritten. She left the gala that evening with Millicent, the pendant at her throat, and the library contract in her bag, and a message from Tamsin confirming that the final restitution payment had cleared. The city moved past the cab windows in long, lit streaks. Millicent was already half asleep in the seat beside her, the way she used to sleep on drives home from Nola's house when Claudia was small, before she knew anything about what it cost to build something and keep it. Claudia looked at her reflection in the window. The pendant was a green point of light against the dark glass. Small, specific, hers. She was 41 years old. She had built something real, defended it with evidence, and carried it forward without needing Reed to regret it first. That was not the life she had imagined when she signed the divorce papers on a Tuesday afternoon, in a conference room that smelled like coffee and carpet cleaner. It was better than the one she had imagined. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to Silent Queen's Calling for more stories about evidence, dignity, and women who know exactly where something came from.